Recording 1, 2.
Took the video off one more time.
Hopefully that's an unobtrusive
It's
way for
just
me
for
to
Bill
get
so
to
he
know
can
all.
look at the pictures and match them up to the faces. So
No malice intended here. There's no funny business. Just so I
we'll
know.
see. It may
Okay,
not even
thank you.
turn out,
Okay.
but
Okay.
all right. Now,
If everybody is ready.
Yep, 2 quick things to remind you. If your internet is at all stable, if Bill's internet has any trouble, I may ask, or I may go ahead and mute people's video. We're going to be spotlighting Bill's video in just a moment. And I think that's it. And outside his is usually more stable than anything. So that said, Brian, are you ready for me to spotlight Bill?
Yep. We are going to go
Alrighty.
ahead and start the spotlight, so everyone will only be seeing Bill. And with that,
Just what we need.
someone stops grabbing their engine.
We've got a motorcycle ready.
All right. And you are
Okay.
being recorded, just to remind you.
Okay,
So we can, if anything happens, you'll get a link.
let's go. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the second session of Bill 469. You have us both, right, Brian?
Yep.
Okay. We have a little bit more introductory work. We've got some little tiny bit of housekeeping. I'll be giving you a little bit of background information. Our motorcyclist is leaving. I'm not sure if you folks are hearing him or not, but anyway, that's one noise distraction that I think we'll be without. This afternoon, I'm joined by a very special guest, my friend Samantha Pearson. Sam is the executive director of Lewisburg Neighborhoods. She conducts her own very special tours of Lewisburg. She calls them Hidden Lewisburg. She does them by bicycle, which she came in on this morning, and by foot as well. They're most intriguing. They deal with a lot of the infrastructure of Lewisburg, particularly some of the infrastructure which is no longer extant. So she does uncover a lot of treasures. And I have joined Sam on her tours, and I highly recommend them. And hopefully in post-COVID times, she'll be resuming these tours as well. Sam is an architect. She's an urbanist. She brings a lot of firepower to this program. So wherever I slip up on those two academic subjects, I'm going to defer to her. She'll be able to bail me out. So Sam, say hi to everybody.
Hey, good to be here.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us. As we indicated at our last program, and I think Heather has told you in the nice materials that she has been forwarding thus far between classes, that we will be starting right in the beginning. This is the tour. I'm going to entitle it Old Lewisburg. We'll be going through the sections where the settlement began, and where some of the oldest buildings, some of the original buildings actually, are still extant. And I'm not exactly sure how far we'll make it, but we've got a lot of exciting things to see along the way. We'll be spanning a period of time in terms of the architecture, ranging from the last quarter of the 18th century right up to the first quarter, nearly the first half of the 20th century. So you'll see the whole gamut. Right away, you might ask where stylish Lewisburg is. Maybe this building behind us doesn't look very stylish, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I know that I had mentioned to you that we would at some point get to style. After all, I think that's what some of you've signed up for, but I believe it will be best explained, exemplified when we can actually point these things out as we go along. Also, the early history of Lewisburg. Some of you, I believe, had inquired at the last session. Heather told me she had some chat questions regarding the earliest history and some of the personages involved. And so I'm going to try to give you a real thumbnail going all the way back to the beginning. Actually, that brings up one other little minor bit of housekeeping I've thought about. That gentle admonishment that I made you before. When I'm throwing around dates, or when you see them on plaques of houses, please take these things with a grain of salt. Unless these dates have been absolutely verified, we're not sure. When one reads the histories, you come up with many conflicting dates. So in some cases, we'll try to get close. Some we are pretty close. Others are highly conjectural. So please be careful. When you see date plaques on houses, always be suspect of those. Right. She is vigorously nodding her head on that one. Likewise, if you are inclined to put a plaque on your own house with a date on it, do whatever you want. But if you want to be thoroughly accurate, you should, in fact, substantiate, verify the dates. The other bit of housekeeping that I wanted, and this is not in the form of an admonishment, gentle or otherwise, we're going to try, and I'm going to have my partners here remind me as well as we go along. We'll try to recite the addresses of these properties so that when you folks are out and about driving the streets or walking or bicycling the streets of Lewisburg, all of which are very pleasurable things to do, have a look at these properties. Those are the only notes that I'm asking you to take. Otherwise, it's just all for fun, or you can come back and look at it on the recording. We are standing in front of the home of the founder of Lewisburg, Ludwig Durr. I'll get to that in a moment. Now, as promised, I'm going to give you a real quick history. Go back maybe 11 or even 14,000 years ago. There is archaeological evidence that there were Native Americans in this area at that point in time. Come way ahead to about 1681. That would be when King Charles gave William Penn a whole great big chunk of land in the New World. And William Penn was fairly old at the time, but he decided to come over and get a look at it. Naturally, that included all of Pennsylvania. He became the proprietor of this vast swath of land in North America. And upon seeing it, he decided that he should entrust it to his 7 children, or some of them anyway, to become the proprietors and to dispense and dispose of the land as they saw fit. So coming way ahead, or at least a few years after William Penn's death in 1718, Conrad Weiser was probably the first white person to have explored the areas around 1736. He came maybe as far north as Lewisburg, or possibly a bit further north to Milton. He was not a contemporary of Ludwig Durr. He was half a generation ahead of him, but the families knew one another. They were both from the Berks County area in Pennsylvania, and he liked the area. And he also, as I said, Conrad Weiser was the famous colonial land agent and a friend of Shikellami's, commonly thought to be the first white man in the area. Lewisburg probably did have a few settlers before Ludwig Durr in the 1770s, but we really don't know an awful lot about them. There may have been another squatter whose family is still here, Christian Van Gundy. He was actually nearby. There were land disputes that prevailed for many years, decades afterwards. He thought that he should have Ludwig's land, but Ludwig ultimately prevailed and got the land. Come forward again to the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. That would have been 1768. That's when another large chunk of Indians, or another large chunk of land was negotiated by the Penns through their proprietaries. And that included the area of Lewisburg. And then by 1769, William Maclay actually surveyed off a large chunk of land, rather large, which was ultimately to become the area in which Lewisburg now resides. That's about 320 acres, including the entire borough of Lewisburg and some of the surrounding area. And that was given through a proprietary warrant to a friend of the Penns, or the Penns' children, I should say. It was called the Prescott. And since Ludwig Durr had already encamped nearly upon this very spot, maybe as early as 1769, 1770, he was familiar with the area, but he actually desired land a little bit to the north of here, primarily around the New Columbus area. That's no more than 6 miles or so up the river. But anyway, that was the land he wanted, but he did lose that in the lottery that was prescribed at the time for the distribution of the land. So he figured he could settle for this land, and this land had been granted by the proprietaries to a Philadelphia minister whose name was Richard Peters. And he knew that Ludwig had a desire for the land, and so he promptly sold it to him, all 320 acres for 320 pounds. So it was a pretty good deal. So Ludwig came and he built his house and his mill. And his house is behind us. And if it doesn't look like a very stylish Lewisburg house or a very remarkable house, well, it's been here for a very long time. It was a log house. It was described as a log mansion at one point in time. It was quite sizable. Obviously, it had some numerous additions and alterations done to it over the years. I just thought of this morning as I pulled up when we have a discussion on style. Like I said, it doesn't look very stylish to you folks, but it deserves a little bit of a 20th century explanation. It's sort of very vaguely federal looking. That means that it's kind of symmetrical, sort of boxy looking. The fenestration is regular of the windows and the doors. We don't know if that's how the log cabin looked or not. But anyway, it is sort of federal, which was the sort of the original American style that had been blended from the Georgian style, which had been forsaken by the 1780s. We won't be seeing too much Georgian along the way, but I'll discuss it when we see the revival styles. This would be a little bit more federal, maybe with some Georgian overtones. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about what happened in the 20th century, primarily around the 60s. That was an era when it was thought to get rid of all the old and replace it with the new. And things like wide board, 8-inch wide aluminum siding, they were just coming into being just coming into place at that point in time. The most fake looking louvered shutters that one could possibly imagine. Those were coming into fashion. The little entryway, probably likewise, something like that may have been coming into fashion. Hence, that's when this set of renovations was done to this house. And that's why you don't see anything that even remotely resembles a log cabin or a log mansion as it was described in certain of the annals of the history of the area. But anyway, take a look at it. When you see that style of, some people called that remodeling, like I said, it was kind of the tenor of the time in the 1960s when it was thought fashionable to make things look new and maybe make them look old. Sometimes it's referred to as phony colonialization. God knows the house was colonial. Speaking of the colonials, obviously Ludwig was one. The nation was in its infancy at that point in time. This was the frontier. Heather likes me to point out that in 1785, a great runaway took place. There was such a threat from the native population, and the loyalists and the Brits decided that they wanted people to be run out of the area. And so there was a mass exodus in 1785. Actually took place right out on the river, nearly behind this house. And people left, men, women, and children. They loaded rafts, they walked down the river, they made their way down as far as Fort Augusta and Sunbury and beyond. Ludwig Durr decided that he didn't want to go. I think we talked a little bit last week that Ludwig may have befriended the Indian population, and we're not exactly sure how. He discovered early on that they liked rum, and so he provided some of that. But anyway, he was the intrepid stayer at that point in time. So he stayed, and around that time he built his mill. And now you all have that fabulous photo that Heather sent you. I believe it's from the 1880s. Is that correct, Heather? About 100 years after the mill would have been built. So do you want to show them the mill, Brian? So this is the mill, and it bears no resemblance to the former mill, of course. We're not even really sure that it stands on the exact location. The original mill may have been in this place. What do you think about that, Sam?
Probably, I think, a little bit further closer to the mouth. I've seen, it depends. There's some renderings that guess at it being even on the other side of the creek.
Okay.
But yeah, this is the region for the mill, and this is a mill.
That is correct. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. Did you want to tell a little bit just about the history of the mill as it exists right now, or I should say the evolution?
Right. It's mostly, I mean, you can look at it and see.
I need to interrupt you
Okay,
two
well,
for
does
just
that
a
help?
moment. Just a moment,
Yeah.
Bill.
Okay.
You need to get Sam on
Right,
your
right.
other
So,
side.
I mean, one of the things you see with that building is it currently looks,
One second.
they may not be able to hear me.
Let's see.
Yeah, I don't want to stand there.
No, I understand. I
No,
just
no,
had her.
she doesn't need to be close. She just needs to be on that side.
Ju-
And
Just needs to be what? She's
Start-
immediately on my right.
good. And could you just start with, again, I know that the house is on the corner of Mill Street. They're asking the exact street location of Durr's house.
Okay, Durr's house is 34 Brown Street. Okay,
Thank you.
let's get another test with Sam. She's
Go
she's
ahead.
immediately to my right now.
Go ahead, Sam.
I don't know if they're gonna be able to understand between the
Do-
distance and the mask.
Okay, do you hear her now?
No, yeah, we really can't hear her. I'm sorry.
Okay, she says it's a little bit sketchy, so
Yeah.
we'll go on with that. Okay, Sam has indicated that the original mill may have been a little bit to actually the east of this mill, a little bit closer to the river. And the early maps indicate that what is now Mill Street and Barton Street were the location of the race that Ludwig Durr had actually dug to power his original mill. It was nearly parallel to what was at the time called Spring Run. It is now Bull Run. Just take a shot over there, Brian, over towards the bridge. Bull Run, some of you are familiar with that. So there are two waterways that were nearly parallel to one another. Sam is confirming that. And Sam and I discussed this the other day. The reason for that, the length of this race, which was required because there is very, very little fall in the land. So Mr. Durr had the requirement to go back a long ways to achieve the kind of fall he needed for the power for his mill. Am I right, Sam? On that? Okay, very good. Yeah, that explains a little bit about milling. Somebody asked about sawmilling. Early mills, in many cases, were both saw and grist mills because, of course, agriculture had not yet really picked up, but there was a need for sawyering. So sawmills, and we think that Ludwig Durr did engage in sawyering as well. Would you say that's correct? Yeah. So anyway, we have a little of the history of Ludwig Durr and his milling operation. He built the house in 1772, we think. Mill was probably the next year later. Okay, before that, I just remembered that we need to talk about Ludwig Durr's plan for the town. He was located outside the area that he ultimately proposed platted as Lewisburg. And that was done in 1775. Coincidentally, it was also the very same year as his death. So he really didn't get to see it come to fruition. There is a map in existence dated 1790. And we think that that map was for the purposes of the disposition of the lots after he was gone, but the map depicts the area as he had envisioned it in 1775. As I said a moment ago, this is outside the bounds. When we move a bit further to the north and the east, I shall show you St. George Street, which is the southerlymost boundary. And I'll describe those boundaries. Originally, the plat was, it was done by Conrad Weiser's son, Samuel Weiser. It was 350 lots, 355 lots, approximately about 35 blocks, 35 town or city blocks. And the main street, main commercial street, obviously is Market Street. The streets were probably copied after plans from southeastern Pennsylvania. So it was a very formal town plan at the time. We'll explain more about that as we go. Did you have anything else?
I don't think this is gonna work technically.
Okay.
We need to be further apart.
Okay,
I mean, I'm inching away.
that's okay.
I am not vaccinated. Many people aren't, and you are still a hazard to us.
Right.
So people have a hard time remembering that, but to be close, but it's not okay.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So I think that we're not gonna be able to make the sound heard.
okay.
and So I'm not sure that, I mean, please continue, but I don't think there's any point in
You don't want to come along?
I'm not gonna be able to talk in a way that people can hear.
Okay. Whatever you feel comfortable
Yeah,
with, Sam.
and
Okay.
I literally am backing up continuously, so now we're taking a picture of people's broken cars.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sam has decided that in the interest of her own safety, that she would like to, and we think that technically it might be a little bit more difficult. So we'll continue on. And we'll join Sam at another point in time when we don't have quite these same constraints.
Right.
And particularly once she resumes her tours.
Okay.
So anyway, thank you very much.
I mean, if we had another mic, it would work, but I don't think.
Do you want to try another one? No,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't work. Okay.
Thank you so much for
Yep.
coming.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, Sam. Okay, we'll move on. Okay. I'll talk to you soon, Sam. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move on. Questions now. Time for a few questions about the early developmental history of Lewisburg. Sorry that we had to lose Sam on this occasion. She would have had some things to add, but morning, afternoon. Any other questions coming in, Heather?
No, not right now.
Okay,
And I'm glad
right.
that Sam did the safe thing, so.
Yes,
Let's
okay.
just continue.
Of course. Yeah. I'm not taking anything for granted. I have been vaccinated, but obviously Sam wants to observe the precautions at this point in time. Let's get a shot of 2 or 3 more buildings. As I had indicated earlier on, this may not be what we would regard as the most stylish part of Lewisburg, but these are important examples, particularly the block house. Can you zoom in on that a little bit, Brian?
Can't really zoom, but I can step a little.
Okay, so if you all can see what we'll call a 4-square cement block house. This is important in the developmental history of Lewisburg as well. This is turn of the 20th century, probably built in the first decade of the 20th century. It's built in what's called a 4-square style. It's a true double, a mirror image double, but most importantly, the material from which it is constructed. It's a rusticated cement block. They were an economical material at the time. By the 1920s, they were thought to not be very durable. Obviously, 100 years later, we know that they're extremely durable and beautiful in their own respect. And we'll be seeing a few more of those as we go along as well. Some of you might ask how Lewisburg got all these nice buildings and how we kept them. The town was basically pretty well built out by the end of the 19th century. I'll be going into more of that as we talk about the areas and they've developed. Folks knew they were building nice houses at the time. Fortunately for us, many of them were kept. How did that happen? Well, as early as the 1960s, hey, look at the Ludwig Durr house. The consciousness began to turn towards the preservation and the restoration and recognition that there were many valuable historic resources, particularly of the built environment, and that we better start taking care of them. And as we go around town, there were a number of folks who had this vision, and they were starting to think about which examples we would preserve and how we would do that. And there were inventories taken of the historic structures through the 1970s. There was an inventory that included about 868 structures considered contributing. That would be all of Ludwig Durr's original plat, plus some additional areas into which we will be going as well. Out of that 868, there were only about 62 that were considered non-contributing. Unfortunately, Mr. Durr's mill was so horribly altered at that point in time, it was considered non-contributing. About 750 of those were primary structures. In other words, they were houses. And folks, believe it or not, about 110 of those structures in that inventory were the wonderful carriage houses and the small barns behind the properties in Lewisburg. And I urge you, when you're traveling the streets of Lewisburg, driving, walking, bicycling, please take the alleys and have a look at those carriage barns, which were later in many cases turned into garages and so on. And I'll be discussing those as we go along. The registration, I should say the nomination to the National Registry occurred in 2004. So we were able to go without any official designation for all of those years and realizing the diminution of very, very few, or the destruction of very few historic properties. Very, very fortunate that citizens in our area were foresighted in that regard. Okay, let's continue on up the street rather quickly now. We've got a lot of exciting stuff. Once again, some of these houses may not look very exciting. Brian, just spin around one more minute to this bungalow style. Okay, green with the red trim and the red chimney. We'll see a couple of these. You can spin around to the one on this side of me as well. These are houses built in what is commonly referred to as the bungalow style. It may actually be more of a type than a style. It also includes things like cottages, and sometimes people call these realtors love to call them capes. But these are houses from the arts and crafts era, commonly referred to as bungalows, originating in California. And prior to that, they had their origin in India. This is a particularly nice example right here. I'll stop for just a minute on this one. I'd love to stop at every one of these. This one was built in 1921. We do know something about it. It was built by an engineering professor at Bucknell at the time. Mr. Entenmann was his name, and he designed this house, and he was actually responsible for the design of the Bucknell Stadium as well. Wonderful
This
house.
is 30 on Brown Street.
That is correct. Thank you very much. 30 on Brown Street. Wonderful, wonderful arts and crafts bungalow. Look at the brickwork, the basket weave brickwork, and come on around and have a look at the chimney on this house, the interior, the porch elevation of the chimney. Okay. The houses on my left, those
Hey,
would be the
Bill?
houses on, yes.
May I interrupt the question from
Absolutely.
Rebecca? And
Yes,
actually,
Rebecca.
you guys on the walking tours, you are
Yes.
welcome to unmute yourselves and interrupt to ask Bill questions directly at any time. But
Okay.
Rebecca was asking about alleys. Do you want to ask your question, Rebecca?
Okay.
Oh,
Go
hi,
ahead,
Bill. How are
Rebecca.
you?
Hi, Rebecca.
I've wondered about alleys because alleys exist, in the city of Boston, but
Yes,
the city I live in, Medford, doesn't have alleys. And
right.
I know that a lot of towns in central Pennsylvania, they have alleys. Well,
That is
like I know
correct.
Mifflinburg does. I know a bunch
Yes.
of, like even Montandon does.
Yes.
What's the purpose of an alley?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking the question, Rebecca. Yes, once again, that would be sort of diagnostic of the Southeast Pennsylvania town plan, the system of alleys. As I indicated before, the borough of Lewisburg is a regular grid pattern. The numbered streets are tangent to the main commercial street on a north-south axis. The main street runs east-west, and the named streets, we'll call them the saintly streets, all 6 of them, those run on an east-west axis as well. And they are all regularly punctuated with alleys at precise intervals in between. And those were to, in a historic time, Rebecca, those were to permit access to the carriage barns to the rear. That was the primary reason for the construction of for the development of the alleys. Cities that were developed at a later point in time, alleys were utilized primarily, in larger cities especially, alleys were utilized for the purposes of services like municipal trash collection and things like that. But yes, Lewisburg has them. One very interesting thing now that you mentioned, I'm sure I'll forget it later, the planners, or I should say the designer of Lewisburg, Mr. Samuel Conrad, was so foresighted that he decided to not have the alleys interrupt Market Street. For those of you who either live in Lewisburg or are familiar with Lewisburg, compare to other similar towns, even other towns in the 2 Susquehanna valleys, like my town, Bloomsburg, for example, where the alleys will punctuate the streets on the main street. They do not intersect Market Street. In no case does an alley intersect Market Street in Lewisburg. Rather unique feature. So thank you for your question very much. And we'll talk more about alleys as we go along. We're going into a few. Let's talk about some of those revival styles. I think I told you that there are very few original styles in Lewisburg. Most of them would be a revival of something else, or they would be the result of an alteration that had taken place in the thoroughgoing cycle of construction and alterations of the buildings. This is a pure example. This is dated 1932. Folks, I think you can almost take that date to the bank. This is what we would call a Colonial Revival house. Boy, there's a term everybody and certainly every realtor really loves to throw around. And what the features that bespeak of the Colonial Revival are the very strict symmetry of the house. This harkens to the Georgian/federal period of several hundred years prior. This house built in 1932 in the Colonial Revival style. Other than the Victorian style, Colonial Revival styles may be among some of the most ubiquitous styles that we would see anywhere. Spin around, Brian. Look at another Colonial Revival. If you didn't get the house number, that was 20 Brown Street, beautiful Colonial Revival house, sort of Georgian. And spin around, you'll only see a handful of these in Lewisburg, and this would be a Dutch Colonial Revival. And this would be evocative of the styles that were prevalent in upstate New York at the time. Likewise, built in the 20s. Four square builder style houses, just shoot in on those a little bit. To my south, we won't even bother with the house numbers. Built in the early part of the 20th century. Built in a vernacular style. Remember, I talked about the preponderance of the buildings being vernacular, meaning that they were designed by local people, built with local materials, and they are houses in Lewisburg are also eclectic, meaning that they have been altered with the adaptation of many differing styles. So when you see something like these pure builder style home, that is exactly what those houses would have looked like, or pretty much what they would have looked like at the time of their construction, early 20th century. Let's continue
Just so
on.
everyone knows, the Dutch house here is
7 Brown Street. Nice example of the Dutch Colonial Revival. Very popular in certain parts of the country. If you go into upstate New York, you will actually see them dating into even the latter part of the 17th century when the style was first brought to the colonies. But that's as good as we get here in Lewisburg. 2 more wonderful examples of the arts and crafts bungalow style, both 1920s. Hey, there's another one of those plates, Brian. See it on 6 Brown Street. 1920 historic Lewisburg. Folks, I think you could almost take that one to the bank. That's just about the era. Mr. Entenmann built his house, which was a little bit more elaborate in 1921. We do know that. I have actually looked at the original hand-drawn architectural plans of that house. That was the first green bungalow, which we passed. Here's another, just a splendid example of the bungalow style. Let's go from the early 20th century. Let's go back a couple hundred years here. Let's just dive around the corner a little bit quick. And let's see, oh boy, time. I meant to inform you folks that your assignment was going to be to keep me on track with this time. It gets away and we've got a lot of exciting stuff to do. So I'll cram it all in, I promise you. Another sort of a bungalow style. Boy, that's a nice one, isn't it, Brian? Look, it has a little clipped gable on the top. Come around, see sort of a nice attenuated arch on the front porch. That column, that's called an elephantine column on the front. When we come to those areas where we've got interesting bits of detail or style, I'll point them out to you, some of those names. When it starts to get real fancy, if you want to just call it bric-a-brac or gingerbread, just go ahead. A lot of that, we haven't seen much of it yet, but that's.
We just got a question in chat of which street we're on. We're on.
Yes. Right now, this is St. George Street.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for your question. Please pop in at any time. This would be the original southerly boundary of Mr. Durr's original plat. And I told you when he built his house, there was no street by his house. And it was, in fact, out of the platted area. This was the first official street. I think we went into a little bit before about the names of the east-west streets, the 6 saintly names. There are many different stories there. Heather'd like me to tell that. In the interest of time right now, I think I'll leave it alone for the moment. But anyway, we do have.
I
the
can
east-west
share that
streets.
with them afterwards, don't worry.
Yes, we'll share that a little bit later, right? The saintly names of the streets. Let's come to 124 Brown Street. You can walk in a little bit closer. As I promised you folks, we would go back a long time. You can see a date plaque on this house, 2 date plaques actually, one indicating 1788. Brian's there right now, and then go over and just show them 1740. This is on St. George Street, folks. When you're touring Lewisburg on your own, your assignment is to definitely look at this house. Very, very important. This is what I'm going to call a half house, and step back and you will see why. Just look right in the very middle of the house, just to the left of the 1788 plaque, and you can see where the westerly portion was distinctly added on. The 1788 may or may not be accurate. The books say 1795. So it's thereabouts. We do know that it was built by Mr. George Knox, and he ran his, operated his tannery in this area at the time. Just a wonderful, wonderful example. One detail here that I do want to point out to you folks, you only see it in 2 or 3 places in Lewisburg. It's this finely formed coped area on the front where there's a rounded brick. Remember, all these bricks were made locally. This is one of the 2 or 3 original brick houses in town. That is the area of the house that's called the water table. There are some things done to this house that I personally, I think have been altered over time. We know that this is of the federal design by virtue of the water table that I just pointed out. When this was an original house, a single house before the other half was built on, it was an asymmetrical federal house, meaning that the door was on one side, 3 bays above and 2 down below. And then of course it was sort of evened out when the other half was built. Typically that occurred when like the family expanded or something like that. People ask about the star. I'll second guess your question. That's more than decorative. That is attached to a long iron rod that traverses the entire span of the house, and that's called a beam iron, and that's what holds the wall together. And also zoom in, Brian, we're standing right here on the type of brickwork. Some of you folks have heard this as well. And this is called Flemish Bond. This was a high style in the federal period where you've got the header brick regularly interspersed with the stretcher of the brick. These are painted. Hopefully you can see it, the short end of the brick. And of course, that's indicating that the wall is at least the thickness of 2 bricks. That's the tie brick in between. Very expensive, very beautiful masonry bond. Let's see,
Hey,
let's
Bill.
continue on. Yes,
Bill,
go ahead.
It's
Yes.
Rebecca.
Hi,
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
What about the foundation?
Yes, let me comment on that. Brian's, wow, timely that you asked that, Rebecca. Here we are. These, I'm going to call these primarily rubble stone. Are you on the foundation here? Okay. There is limestone involved here, but it is not all limestone. So they're not ashlar. They're not cut or dressed very specifically. They're rather crude. They're a little bit more than rubble stone. This was a high style house in its time in 1795, which is where the books put the house. I believe it. There was a concern, as you can see, the water table continues on. There was a concern for a stylish looking foundation beneath the water table, Rebecca. So you can see they are beautiful stones. They are not regularly coursed, nor are they all of exactly the same material. Limestone is a predominant building material in our area, but in early times it was tough to get, so they often relied on what we call field stones or rubble stones. Did that help you, Rebecca?
Yes, thank you. I was going
Absolutely.
to ask another question too, even
ahead.
about all the beautiful
Absolutely.
fieldstone homes that are in that area too.
Yes, there are fieldstone homes. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm actually going to be showing you one in just a very short while that would have been constructed out of more what I consider fieldstones or rubble stones, as opposed to those quarried stones. Now I want you to take a look at one of my very, very favorite things in all of Lewisburg. And among the architecture buffs of this town, this one, folks just always zone in on this one, I should say. And this is the kitchen house. And I have never been in. I do not know the exact date, but if it doesn't go to 1795, it probably does go to the 1830s of the other side of the house. And it's just a wonderful little building. The kitchen, of course, was put off to the side in that era to eliminate the heat of cooking in summer. You can see the wonderful chimney. And of course, there's a big cooking fireplace behind that. And you can see the timber frame construction actually showing beneath the weatherboards. You see, can you get a shot of that, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Hey, good morning. There's Pastor Ryan. Hey, look, guess who we have on here? We're on a tour. Luther is on. Are you on your way to the church? Great. Good to see you. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ryan. Okay. Pastor Ryan lives out in this neighborhood as well. I wasn't going to do this, but since I don't have Sam, I'm on my own here. I do want to just show you this plot of land on the riverbank. It's an elevated area. It is green today, and maybe you can even see the picnic tables. Do we have it? We can walk up there a little bit more closely. That was the site of the coal gasification plant. Lewisburg, in the latter part of the 19th century, even into the early part of the 20th century, did have manufactured gas for the purposes of house lighting. And that was the site of the coal gasification plant. We're going to get close to the river again, but I did want to show you that was a very important industrial feature. Many towns had coal gasification. And of course, there was a network of pipes beneath the streets that took the gas into not every residence, but a good many for sure. How about that house again, Brian? This gray house, we'll call this the George Knox house. Had many names over time. See those little shed dormers on top? Those, of course, are not original. How about that chimney? Look at that chimney. That supports probably at least 4 or maybe 5 fireplaces on this easterly end of the house. And it's got a little decorative device that I can't quite explain on top. I'm going to call it a corbel table. That's where those bricks are sticking out. Somehow I do not think that the original builders would have put that on as a decorative device, but it was an extremely high style house in its time. Federal house, the original federal construction, primarily we were just a little bit late for it here in Lewisburg. It did prevail from about 1780 to 1830. It was the original American style, and it was in revolt or rebellion of the Georgian style. And
Hey,
I already
Bill,
showed you. Yes.
Bill, it's Rebecca again. I have a question about,
Absolutely.
how they manage the household. That detached kitchen's really cool. It makes me think they must have had servants. I sure as heck hope they didn't have slaves, but maybe they did.
No, no, there weren't that many slaves in Lewisburg, but many of these houses that I'll be showing you did have the detached kitchen house. Very few of them are extant currently. That would be one of the very few. So sometimes there was a kitchen contained within. Sometimes people called that a summer kitchen, simply because you didn't want to have all the heat inside. Sometimes it was used for the purposes of butchering or laundering or something like that. And it would not necessarily, Rebecca, been indicative of the fact that the people had servants, or certainly not slaves at the time. Just that the homeowners would have desired
They did their
to.
own work. I have a hard time
They-
believing, as wealthy
These
as
were-
they were, they did their own housework.
I think
All those
that
fireplaces, I don't think so.
please don't overlook the fact that up until about 1812, when the borough was incorporated, that there were less than 100 families in Lewisburg. So we were still very, very much on the edge of the frontier. And those fireplaces were required for the heating of the house. And I'm going to show you those. We're actually going to have the opportunity to go in a house where there are 5 fireplaces on one wall. And they were put there for a very practical reason, for the purposes of heating. Now, if we can continue, okay?
Okay.
We'll be talking more about that as we go. This was not a particularly stylish area at that point in time. Pretty rough and ready. This is South 2nd Street. When one looks at the maps of this area up until 1868, maybe even 1884, was primarily undeveloped, believe it or not. So these houses that you're looking at are just a little bit later. I'm thinking that the houses on the west side, the side that Brian is facing right now, these probably came maybe right around the late 1880s. On the other side, on the east side, no, it's the opposite. I'm sorry, folks. These would have come a little bit earlier. On this side behind me, that would be the east side. These came a little bit later, maybe even after 1880. Now, actually, the reason that I brought you up here, folks, very important in my mind, and I hope in yours as well, particularly those of you who enjoy conservation, restoration, preservation, and all that sort of thing. Brian, just get a shot on these two buildings right over here. These two wonderfully restored houses. These are vernacular houses. They are vaguely federal in their design. They're very, very, very plain. They were, sort of folk type houses, but they have been very lovingly restored in recent times. And the material that has been used on them is it's the modern day equivalent of wood siding, and it's called hardy plank. It's a cementitious product. Environmentally, it's a very good product. It's relatively easy to work. It is expensive, and it will take those luscious colors that you see on there right now. Also, I talked about some of the add-on features, the bric-a-brac or the gingerbread. Once again, that's new in the case of these two houses. It has been added on. We'll just call it saw work, spindle work, scroll work. Where there are specific names, sometimes it's punched out, sometimes it's sawn through, and there are a variety of styles and designs, which we'll talk about as we go along. And then let's continue on, Brian. This excites me very much. I have been watching this through our winter. There is new construction going on in this location. This is at approximately, address here is it's in the 200 block, 205 South 2nd Street. For those of you who, I should say those of you who I have inspired to do tours of your own, please watch the construction of this house. Aren't we anxious to see what happens? Let me give you just a few little ticklers here and jog your mind a little bit on what may be happening. Obviously, in historic time, there was another house here. I personally don't remember it. The lot had been vacant for a while, but historically, there had been another house similar to those which we've just viewed that was in this area. It was torn down at some point in time. Someone in very, very recent times, and I step back over here, Frank, and I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what the genesis or the inspiration of this is, but someone has a desire to build a house here, and I have a feeling from what I'm seeing, just by virtue of the fenestration of the first floor, asymmetric, two windows on the south side, a doorway, a window. Doesn't it look exactly like those houses right next door? What do you think, folks? It certainly bears the same, some of the same hallmarks as the historic houses to the immediate south. Given property values in Lewisburg, we would suspect, and the rigors of the Architectural Review Board, we suspect that it's going to probably be something very nice, and we hope that we get to see that evolve.
Can I ask you to take the camera for just a moment?
You may.
Because I am going to take off my jacket. It's turning into such a beautiful day.
Absolutely. Brian is removing his jacket. And let's see. No, I guess I can't do that.
Brian's not part of the tour, folks.
Brian's not part of the tour. Okay. I just wanted to just step over here.
He's not old enough.
just a little, we'll call this scuttlebutt, folks. I'm conjecturing about the style, the type of house, and the potential value of the house that's being constructed around us. I hope that it's something wonderful. There are two more houses. I'm going to have Brian feature them for you right now. These would be on the east side of the street. sort of catter corner from the houses that I've already shown you. What do you folks think of all those colors that were going on with those others? They're pretty cool, aren't they? I like these two as well. The sunlight yellow and this sort of aqua colored blue. This house, I noticed, has recently had, within the last 3 days, had the for sale sign put in front of it. It's been recently restored. It was a rather modest folk Victorian house when it was built, probably built in the Victorian style, latter part of the 19th century. It's been restored, of course, and it has recently been put on the market for about $685,000. So gives you some indication as to the values in this neighborhood. This is just a particularly nice neighborhood, not what we call one of the totally grand areas of town, but very nice nonetheless. How are we doing on time here? 5:02. Okay, got to keep moving. Got a lot of territory to cover. Maybe we'll come back. Brian, we were going to make a double pass on this street, but I want you to take a shot on the east side of the street all the way. These are houses that were primarily all built in the 20th century, and you've got a variety of styles ranging from a cottage style house on the corner, which has a luscious carriage barn I'll show you later, a new carriage barn, another sort of Colonial Revival style house, and another Colonial Revival in brick. Beautiful house, sort of 4 square, maybe slightly evocative of the Georgian era. And then the house adjacent to that, to the north, would be another 20th century house. Once again, this one combines a number of different styles. We better stop, Brian, because this was the building we wanted to feature right here behind us. And this is the Union County Courthouse. I can't spend as much time as I want to here because we've got appointments we have to keep. But this building was built in 2 phases in 1857, and then a large annex was built in 1971. Very, very sympathetic to the building. It is one of Lewisburg's most premier examples of the Greek Revival style. And we talked about that last week at the First Presbyterian Church. It does have the colossal columns in the Ionic order, has a very, very well-formed, very well-proportioned pedimented area. I think we'll step across the street. At some point we will. The very formal Greek entryway with the entablature, the acanthus leaf. You will see the acanthus leaf in many various places. Remember the capital arrangements that I had told you about, the orders. This is the Ionic order. These are smooth columns, so they would not have been of the strict Doric order that we talked about before. But this is just a magnificent building, built in 1857, 2 years after the formation of Union County, when Union County and Snyder County parted ways. Let's see, I'll have more to say about this building. There's just a bunch of architectural details on that, but it's timely that we take in this building, probably the first full-blown Queen Anne example that we have seen on the tour. Not many of these in Lewisburg at all. A few more in Mifflinburg. Rebecca, you might remember that there are a few more of this type over there. The Queen Anne style, irregular massing, I should say. The shapes are very, very peculiar on the house. Likewise, the ornamentation just kind of runs the gamut all the way from the lattice work in the pedimented area of the front porch. Can you see that, folks? Maybe Brian needs to come over. I wanted to point out too that that is actually executed in strap iron. Those are pieces of metal that are woven together to give that lattice effect. And the columns on this house, they do not follow any of the Greek or the Roman orders. These are what we would call table leg columns. They look like the legs from tables, don't they? Beautifully built house, built in about the 1880s by Mr. Matlack, who was probably one of Mr. Himmelreich's partners at the time in the boat building and the lumber business. Just wonderfully inconsistent in its shapes. It's consistently picturesque and picturesquely inconsistent. My goodness, look at the shapes of all those dormers perched atop the crest of the roof, and the acroteria on the top of the roof formed in terracotta, balloon chimneys. This is loaded. This is a Queen Anne house. We'll get another look at it as we come around. Take a look at another grand house. We better do it from this side, Brian. We're really, really pushing our luck on time because we've got a couple of appointments that we're trying to keep, so we may come back. This is commonly known in town as the Tuscan Villa. It was built in 1870 by Mr. Marsh, who operated a very, very large and successful foundry and implement manufacturing concern just down the street from where we are right now. And this was built by L.B. Christ in 1870, and it immediately replaced another large-scale house on this corner, which had formerly been the Female Academy and subsequently turned into the Buffalo House Hotel. Burned down, Mr. Marsh bought the property and had this building erected by Mr. Christ. Let's continue on here fairly quickly if we can, Brian. Folks, can you believe that we've burned up an hour already and we're about 1/16 of the way through this tour? Is everybody enjoying themselves, Heather? Can you get a read on their faces? Are they looking at any Lewisburg delights here yet?
I think you'd best just ask them, folks. Any questions, any comments?
This is totally fantastic.
We're trying. We're giving it our best. There's too much to take in. If y'all were out here with me, I could show it to you a lot better. Brian is back on this Queen Anne house again. We were talking about alleys and carriage houses and garages, auxiliary, ancillary buildings. Once again, there are no less than 110 of these outbuildings that are on the National Register of Historic Places. That's how important they are in Lewisburg. We're continuing on down into the area. Envision all of this land to my right, that would be to my south. This was a very, very large swath of land in the second quarter of the 19th century, would have been devoted to the foundry and manufacturing concern of Mr. Marsh, who built that big villa house. Spin around and take a look at that again. That's built in the Italianate style. The Italianate style prevails in all of Lewisburg. It's simply the most prominent style everywhere. If the building was not built in the Italianate style, in many, many cases, the features were added on, like the extended eaves on the roofs, the corner coin blocks, the elaborate scrolls underneath the eaves, the fanciful front porches with the attenuated arches. And this one has a grandly developed belvedere on top, as you can see. It's the equivalent of about 2 rooms right on the top of the house. Historically, there was another belvedere atop the one that you see right there, onto which the occupants could go and just look all over the place. Remember, when that house was built and the Union County Courthouse, none of these buildings that we're looking at to my south were here. So that is considered high ground in Lewisburg. It's well above the flood, and it had a commanding view of the Susquehanna River. We're headed due east right now to the Susquehanna. I thought that I had some spots in this tour, folks, where I had nothing to talk about, but I think you're getting to know me well enough that there's always something to talk about. How about 100 South Front Street, Brian? Here we go. Talk about variety in architecture. Another house made nationally famous in no less than Better Homes and Gardens, 1951. It's a wonderful, wonderful example of an early ranch style house. Boy, Brian is so excited he's going down to get the full length on it. It's currently owned by Dr. Tom and Carrie Albright here in Lewisburg. It's a beautiful house. They have invited me inside this home, and what they have done is nothing shy of spectacular. This was all land, incidentally, folks, that was occupied by the Marsh Foundries and their machine works. They were, I don't think I had mentioned earlier that in early Lewisburg, they were considered probably the preeminent heavy manufacturer. They, along with another competing firm, made agricultural equipment in their foundries. They were long gone after the foundries left this area of town and we bring to the area to my south here. There were some textile mills that came in. Those buildings, of course, are no longer extant. Brian, we can't leave this building alone.
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh my God, Brian and I spent so much time trying to figure out what that is. Just one or two quick guesses on what it might be. That's all I'm going to entertain because I'll guarantee you can't figure it out. Anybody? Nobody
Telephone
even-
company.
Oh, telephone company. How about an insurance office built in 1913, 1914? Does that seem unbelievable or what? An insurance office built by the Molesevich family. They're still insurance people here in Lewisburg. And they built this building for the purposes of their office on first floor and a couple of residential apartments upstairs. See the little balconettes up there where the upstairs residents could actually look out into what? The alley. They had a great view and a nice set of windows. Brian, we're going to move on from this, but come over and zoom in on this. I know you can.
By the way, folks, this is 18 on what street are we in?
This is, no, this is St. Louis Street.
Oh,
We are at 18 St. Louis Street. We're headed towards the river. This building is built from, this is not a traditional building material. These are paving bricks. And I'm going to show you how I know that. These bricks are repressed with the name of the manufacturer, the local manufacturer, Watsontown Brick. And if you'll look at these little dimples on these bricks were intended to be laid on their side, and this provided the spacing into which the aggregate material was swept. Sand or limestone fines were put between the bricks for the purposes of paving streets. They're wonderfully hard baked brick intended for paving purposes. The Molesevichs wisely decided to use them in the construction of their office building. Okay. Heather, is there a lot of noise from all these machines that are whirling around us here? Cranes,
Thankfully, not a lot, just
Okay,
an
good.
occasional sound.
just an occasional sound. Okay, we're approaching the Susquehanna River. There's so much to tell here. I wish that Sam had been able to stay on with us. I'll try to put it into a summarized form. The end of St. Louis Street, the easterlymost end at the river, Water Street, the intersection of Water Street, which is the north-south street, one of the first streets in town, and the river, obviously. Brian and I had talked about this previously. I did want to stop here for a moment. He thinks he knows how to get a good shot of this. I want to talk just very quickly about the evolution of transportation in Lewisburg. Up until 1818, there was no bridge to come to Lewisburg. It was stranded. To get to Lewisburg from the other side, and mind there were very, very few roads in this area. The only real roads were on the other side of the river, okay, on the easterly side. So to get over to Lewisburg at that point in time, one would have had to take a ferry boat, and there were several ferries that operated in this area. And if you look a bit to our south, to my right, that is the area in which a dam was constructed, and I'll tell you about the purposes of that dam. There was a ferry, I sort of got ahead in the story. There were ferry boats that crossed the river before the dam was built. In the location of the current river bridge, which is first in the foreground, Brian? Yep. Can you go to the current river bridge? Built in 1988. The bridge that preceded that bridge would have been built in 1906. And before that, there was the original covered bridge, which would have been constructed in 1818. That bridge washed away primarily in 1865, may have been rebuilt, some attempts at rebuilding it, probably nothing too successful. Immediately to the north, beneath the existing bridge, you can see the Steel Truss Railroad Bridge, which was built in 1912. That sets on the piers of the original covered bridge, which accommodated all manner of transportation trains, trolleys, horse, pedestrian, etc. And that was built in 1885, almost in 1880. Let me get this straight. 1888, immediately, no, I still have this wrong, folks. 1868, immediately preceding the immersion of railroads into Lewisburg, which would have been 1869. So we've had a number of bridges. Many have been damaged by floods, and we'll talk a little bit about floods as we come up. Christine is waiting for us, I believe. My friend Christine has invited us to see some artifacts that she has, and we're also going to look at an original wharf. Let's take a look at her house first of all. Let me see if Christine is available. Hi, Chris. How are you? We're here. We're only an hour late, but you know how this old talker is. Yeah. So come on over here, Brian. Let's introduce my friend Christine Sperling, is the owner of this fine house. Christine is one. Heather says hi.
Is Christine, have you been vaccinated?
Yes, Christine has been vaccinated.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, we had to, one of our party had to jump out already. So you and I are good to go. Christine is one of my colleagues in the BILL program. Christine is Professor Emeritus of Art History at Lewisburg University, where she specialized in Italian Renaissance art. And some of you may be taking her wonderful BILL course this semester. Yeah, may have a few Impressionism. And Christine, additionally, she wears many hats. She is also a docent at the Packwood House Museum. So we've got a lot of things in common. And Christine and her husband live in this wonderful house at 40 Water Street. And Christine has agreed to tour us around here just a little bit. We were talking about the river, Christine, and the evolution of the transportation and so on. I think before we have you show us your photos and go into the explanation of your house, let's just continue on for 1 second about the evolution of transportation across the Susquehanna River. Sorry, folks, I had those dates kind of all bungled up, but that's because the histories don't necessarily tell us exactly when the bridges were damaged by flood. 1889 for sure, the Johnstown flood was very hard on the bridges. But probably more importantly, in the evolution of transportation to Lewisburg. If I may, Heather, just a second, before it skips my mind. On the other side of the river in 1830, the west branch of the Pennsylvania Canal was constructed. Needless to say, the powers to be in Lewisburg had hoped that canal would be constructed on this side. Sure, Chris. Would be constructed on this side of the river. But the engineers chose the other side due to the terrain, which made it look like Milton would become the town of prominence at the time. But anyway, it was built on the other side of the river.
Bill,
Lewisburg
I'm
was
sorry
left
to
out.
interrupt, but Bill, can you just take a moment and just adjust your earpiece? Something's wrong with the microphone. Oh, I think we lost him. Hold on one moment, folks. Bear with us, quick technical difficulty. Okay.
Did I turn it off? Right? Did I
Back?
touch it? Am I
Okay.
back and better?
I'm sorry about that, but that's okay because now I can hear you again. It was breaking up, so.
Let me ask you, I'm rambling here for an hour and 10 minutes. Are we having pretty good technological success thus far?
Up until then, yeah, I started cutting out about 5 minutes ago, cutting in and out. I think it just needed to be adjusted.
Okay, I did feel it slipping down. Thank you. I'm sorry
Yep,
that I
I'm
didn't
just
let you
gonna
interrupt
find
me.
you and re-spotlight.
Okay,
I think I already did.
Oh, you did? Okay, thanks, Brian.
okay. Are we back in gear?
Yep.
Okay. Minor technological snafu we had to overcome here, Chris. So anyway, I was still on the river. I was talking about the canal, not much time on this. The decision to construct the canal was on the eastern side of the river, running in a north-south direction. We will. Let's do that. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Christine is going to take us down to the riverbank, and I'll be able to explain this a little bit more thoroughly. We'll walk around the end here. She's got a just wonderful view of the river, obviously. She'll also tell us a little bit about the dam when we get down here. The fact that Lewisburg was really left out of the picture by the canal having been built on the opposite side of the river, relatively quickly thereon, a decision was made to attempt to connect the canal on the other side to Lewisburg via the river without a viaduct. And so viaducts were commonly used as crossings of the canal on creeks, small creeks and streams, etc. But that would have been quite impractical, of course, with the Susquehanna River. So if you look right across the river to the orange roof, that is currently May's Drive-In Restaurant, and envision that area where there would have been a cut or a cross-cut canal that would have been perpendicular to the bank of this river. And it would have been perpendicular to the westerly bank of the canal, which is about 3/4 of a mile inland. There are no remnants of any of this left, but the histories detail it rather significantly. There was a crosscut put in that connected the west branch of the Pennsylvania Canal with the Susquehanna River. So the canal boats were able to cross the river at that point. Of course, the elevation of the river waters were not always reliable. So there was a dam constructed just downstream of the crosscut. Chris is going to talk about that a little bit, show us where it is.
Well, the water is a little bit high right now.
Oh, yes, of course. You've got to be on this side of me, Chris.
Okay.
And we can stand close because we're vaccinated. Okay. Yes.
I haven't been vaccinated.
Okay.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, but let's see.
The
Yeah,
dam we were referring to.
The water is a little bit high, so we really can't see where the dam would have been. But when the water is lower, there's an area of rocks about maybe 100 feet up or so that goes into the deepest part of the river.
In times of low water, you can actually see that, right,
Yeah.
Christine?
And
Yeah.
people walk out there and fish from there and things like that. Water birds like to go there, like herons and things like that.
Yes. So that is what maintained the level of water in the river for the passage of the canal boats. And there was a significant canal boat building industry here in Lewisburg. It would have been immediately to our north on the riverbank. And we did hear a little bit about that last week when we were talking about Mr. Himmelreich and Mr. Billmeyer and Mr. Marsh and Mr. Matlack and a number of other people who were involved in the business of building canal boats. And there were actually boats built in the Lewisburg Canal Boat Works that were larger than the boats that were used in this section of the canal. There were some boats built as much as 80 feet long that were actually used in the canal system in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So they were built here, they were transported down the river because they didn't fit in the canal, and then they were moved over to the canal system on the eastern side of the state. Now, while we're down here, before we talk about Christine's house, which is a real conglomeration, amalgamation of styles and constructions and periods, we're going to talk about something that is original, and that's the wharf area. Okay, Christine's going to lead us to the wharf. And in the early days of Lewisburg, there was obviously, before the canal was built, well before, there was significant commerce which took place on the Susquehanna River. And so the properties which you're seeing to my left, to the north, I think Brian's going to take those in right now. There would have been wharfs which would have accommodated the passage of freight and passengers from the river vessels to the properties on Water Street. And now Christine is going to show us the remnants of the original wharf that this has been topped with cement in more recent times, but this is the area where the loading and the offloading of both products and passengers would have taken place from the ferry boats.
There are some original stones here. Kind of buried.
Okay. Oh, yes. Of course. Here are some of the original stones of the wharf as it was constructed right at the turn of the 18th century. And this would have been done by people who had names such as Elikhuisen. If you'll recall, Mr. Matthias Elikhuisen. He may have actually lived in a log cabin, spin around, Brian, to where this greenhouse is located on the west side of Water Street. Yes, there are some wonderful stones over here. He operated a ferry boat. Remember, he only lived to 37 years old, and he didn't spend a lot of time at his ferry business. He apparently likes to do some other things. Anyway, he had a business here. And now let's take a shot of the river elevation of Christine's house. And folks, you've got a nice surprise coming up. This building, we've determined, was constructed not as you see it, but as it's in the form which Christine will show you in a moment, in a delightful photograph that she has. You want to do it right out here, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can set it down over here. Let's see if we can get this in.
You can go ahead and talk.
Okay, yes, the original building on this site was, which is still here, incidentally, every bit of it. And Christine has been so gracious as to show me the entire inner structure of the building all the way from top to bottom. And the original building is here. And we have determined that it was constructed between 1856 and 1868. So it did come a little bit later, and it was constructed in the form of a warehouse or a storehouse, we'll call it. And she's going to call up a photo. I'm actually going to have Heather send you a beautiful photo of this, which we think was taken when, Christine, maybe around the 1880s, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it was still in its original form. This house has undergone some very, very, you want to put it in darkness a little bit?
Yeah, that's what
Okay, we're going to go into, you get a nice shot of the back? Yes. Once again, folks, this doesn't look like anything from that era that I'm describing to you. I'll attempt to explain that a little bit more thoroughly when we go around the front. Originally, it didn't look much like it does right now. It has undergone some very significant transformations, including in that period to which I was referring earlier on, that arts and crafts bungalow period. Remember that? The early houses we saw down on Brown Street. Can you do a good job on this, Brian? Oh my God. Heather, what do we think? Do our folks see this wonderful shot of this house?
There's some there, but when you send it to me, I'll pass it on as an email.
Okay. Do they see the shot that Brian is taking of it?
Yes, that's a good shot.
Okay. And that shot, we think that it's probably from the 1880s. It probably is the original appearance of the building as a storehouse. Okay. Gonna show us in here. Okay. Yes. Oh my God, I forgot this. Okay. Now, let's see. For those who had asked about stonework, here are the beautiful dressed limestone blocks. Christine has now graciously invited us in, and this is the original foundation of this building. When I was talking earlier about foundations, the rubble stone, field stone versus the cut limestone, this building came a little bit later. So these stones were being quarried in our area. And you can see that they are rather regularly coarse. They're put in what I call sort of an ashlar fashion. And there's something here that we'll be talking about throughout the course, throughout the rest of our session, actually, the remaining sessions that we have in our course. And that is the construction of the corners. This is a beautifully formed example of a coined corner where you can observe these larger rocks at regularly spaced intervals, sort of tying everything together. Maybe if you step back, Brian, you can see it even a little bit more. When we point these out on other buildings, maybe even the Tuscan Villa, which we saw a little bit earlier, they were put on those buildings for decorative purposes. In this specific instance, the coins are actually the structural tie members of the corners of the wall. And if you inspect these very closely, and I've looked at them from top to bottom, and they are graduated in size from large at the bottom, increasingly smaller, minutely so, as you move as you move upwards. And this, of course, was due to the fact that these stones, these coin stones, are extremely heavy. And so they had a desire to lift less weight. Once again, difference between the quarried stones, these stones are cut from either an outcropping or from a limestone quarry. Limestone very prevalent in our area, and hence it was a favored building material. Just take a look at the rest of this construction. I wasn't even going to comment on it, but I can't help myself. Yes, have a look. About 20 inches. These stones, folks, are about 20 inches thick. And once again, this is the foundation of the original storehouse, the portion beneath which you were looking at in the photograph. That would have been one of the windows. This was the opposite elevation of the photo that we had sent you. And of course, this would have had direct ingress and egress to the wharf area immediately out the door. This was an area, even by the time of construction, that was highly flood prone. And Christine has told me about the elevation of the waters, particularly in 1972, which was the flood of records. But needless to say, it was well beyond destruction because it's so wonderfully built. Even the addition has withstood the floods. And this is all poured in place concrete. And we think it was done probably in the early part of the 20th century, right, Christine?
I think so.
Yep, evocative of that arts and crafts style. And you'll see that once we go out. That's a little hard for you folks to get a grip on right now, how they would have transformed this more colonial looking building into an arts and crafts bungalow or cottage style, but they did it. At the time, the renovations were so significant. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah. When we look down in this direction and over in this direction, this is an extension of the original building. And originally it was built to be a large open porch.
Large open
Wraparound
porch.
porch.
I
Yeah.
say immediately above.
Yes,
Yes. And then subsequently it was closed down.
yes.
Yes, right. And there have been the additions to this house, Christine, have been from the period of the early 20th century, this poured in place cement, through the 1970s, correct?
Yes.
So this house has evolved over a period of more than 100 years. So, and you'll see that when we go outside.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Can
That's
you
great.
take the camera again for just a minute?
Absolutely. Okay. I guess I'm actually taking a photo of the river at this point. Brian is readjusting his jacket. This, yes, okay. Okay. This was the open porch, Christine?
Yes.
Okay.
Built in the early 1900s.
Built
You
in,
can see that kind of arts and crafts. You called it an elephantine.
yes. Let me get over here. Yes, yes. Yes, Christine's pointing out a neat architectural feature I always like to show. Once again, evocative of that era of construction, the tapered, or some people call it the battered column, or I like to use the word elephantine. You can see it does have a slight taper. Once again, highly evocative of the arts and crafts period of the early decades of the 20th century when this was built. And that area that Christine was pointing to a moment ago, that was the open porch on this house. Brian, just take a shot of the gable end of the house, and then we'll have some sense of what the house looked like originally. The house, yes, of course.
You can see that part of the porch now is glassed in the middle there, but the corner is open with screens, but it's still open to the air, and that retains very much the same look that it had.
We don't
originally
hear
in the
Christine
early
at all, just to let you know.
Yes. Are you getting her?
No.
They did. Do you want to just repeat that, Chris? What's wrong with that, Heather? I'm standing right next door to her.
Okay, the whole porch here would have been open, and you can see part of it has been glassed in, and now that's an enclosed room that we call the sunroom. But on the corner, the room there really retains much of its original look. It's open to the air. It has that kind of hip ceiling. I don't know if that's
Yes,
what it's called.
hip ceiling, correct.
And so there is a little bit of the original that that survives. And then the porch also went down in that, toward the north. And now that encloses what is the kitchen.
Yes. So it's been wonderfully adapted over time. Did you hear that? Okay.
I
Heather?
don't think they were getting any of that either. And I don't know
No.
what the problem is, and we won't worry about it for right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, folks. He must have tried to pull out his earphone again. I apologize. Bill is surprising me with some of these guests, and we'll be having a discussion of CDC guidelines following this class.
Really,
We've had problems.
we've done really well because this is so tricky trying to do this out here. Am I in yet? Right.
I believe you are.
Am I in, Heather?
You are in.
Okay, we switched out AirPods.
We
Let's,
should be spotlighted again.
why don't you come over here for a second, Chris?
No.
Let's see. Can you hear
Um,
Christine now? Let's try Chris again.
So anyway, we were looking at this big porch.
That's
Are you
much
getting
better.
Christine?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, good. We didn't want to miss this. Thanks, Christine. Sorry.
Okay, so onto the original stone core in the early 1900s, they built a big wraparound porch that went all the way from the front porch to the back of the house, and then along the east side of the house toward the north.
On top of.
And that was all open. Now you can see that the middle part here has been glassed in, so that's an enclosed room. But here on the corner, we still have an open porch, which retains very much of the same character of the original.
Did we get that, Heather?
We did indeed.
Great. Okay. Christine has a wonderful accounting of how the house has evolved. Because like I said, to the untrained eye, it would just be extremely difficult. I have had other people, other observers who have simply referred to this as a bungalow style house. And when Christine and I really began investigating the origins of this thing a while back, we discovered that there were numerous transformations that had taken place over a long period of time on this house. Let's go around to the front. Thanks,
Okay.
Chris. Yes, go
So
ahead.
you don't want to see the chalet
Yes,
from the 1970s?
yes. Okay.
Look at
Yeah.
that.
You there? Still there, Brian?
For some reason, it won't.
Okay. Okay. Do you hear me, Heather?
Is it better if I stand?
Yes.
Yes, over here,
Okay.
Christine.
Okay.
So if I'm making a little introductory comment, when we were down at the Durr house and I had commented on style, quote unquote, of the Durr house, or at least the recent style, the remodeling of the 1960s and what had taken place. And that, once again, that sort of bespoke of the taste at that time, attempting to make old things look new. In this specific instance, there was another feature that took place that was, I guess it was sort of prominent at that point in time, or it was sort of popular, I should say, in the 1970s. And how do you describe it, Christine? What has taken place back here?
Well, what they've done is they have built on top of the stone core and extended the third floor so that, and even an attic at the very top, but they've changed the roof line. And to me, it has the look of a kind of chalet.
Chalet. Yeah.
To me, that seems very 70s.
That's right. That's right. 1970s. Thanks, Chris. That's good. That sort of brings us up to date on what's going on with the evolution of the styles.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's go around and we'll see if we can get one final shot of it from the outside, and maybe you'll be our guests will be able to relate it a little bit more to the photo which we've shown you and which Heather in turn will be forwarding to your email. So you'll see some of that original house before it became the 1920s bungalow, and certainly well before it became the 1970s chalet.
Hey, Bill, I have a question. It's Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi, is there other evidence of the original store when it was used as a storeroom in the house? Like
Um,
woodwork, I mean, not the woodwork, the
Yeah.
stone.
No. That's a good question, Rebecca. No, inside the house, Christine, correct me, let me see on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but on the inner core of the house, there's no real evidence of what would have indicated that it was a storeroom or a warehouse, or there is.
I would say that there are some openings that are very deep. And that's the part where there's an opening, whether it's a window or a passageway through the original stone building.
Okay,
And you've got walls in some cases, like from the sunroom into the living room. I would say that the walls are about almost 2 feet thick.
yes. And so there are passages that probably would have been useful for those purposes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So yes, does that help you, Rebecca?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. Also, I was just thinking, did we see areas in the floor that we thought? We did determine that the location of the stairway was probably original.
Yeah.
That would have gone from the second floor. Originally, there would have been, we think, no dwelling taking place in
I
this
don't think
house.
so.
No, this was strictly storeroom.
Yeah.
Okay, let's walk on around. We're going to try to get over to April's. Yeah, boy, this time gets away from me, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
I just
Thank
ask
you
a
so-
question
thank you
about-
so much.
Details.
I do.
Yes.
I wanted to ask a question
Hold on
about
one second.
flooding
Yes.
and what you do for
About the
flood
what?
protection.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Flooding and flood protection.
Yes, flood.
I know
flooding.
that Susquehanna can flood.
That's right. Okay, it's important. Christine will talk a little bit about here. She and her husband haven't lived here through the major floods, but she does know what that consists of.
Yeah.
I will tell you, as a point of reference, Brian, just spin around for a second to this little brick house, which is at a considerably higher elevation. It's directly across the street from Christine's house. And during 1972, the water was at least at the level of the baseboards on the first floor. So that gives you an idea how high the water was in Christine's house.
Yeah.
What's the watermark, Christine, in your house? Do you know where 72 was in there?
I think it was about, it was at least at the top of the stairs there.
Okay,
Yeah.
at least at the top of the stairs. So it was on the
It-
first,
it
in
was
the
on
first,
first floor.
it was definitely on first floor in this house. Okay, very good. And the arts and crafts details, Christine was pointing out as well, the decorative rafter ends, the little console, see that on the corner, that would be that little diagonal feature with the corbel block beneath it. All devices from the arts and crafts period, including this nice tripart window that I'm looking at here.
Yeah.
And once again, you can see, we think that that's all cement behind
I
that
believe
stucco.
so, yeah.
This house, you can see where the transition of the original stone storehouse is, and then with the bay, projecting bay that was put on to the west, and that was formed with poured in place concrete. And it was all stuccoed to give one texture, correct?
And I
Okay.
just wanted to point out
Yes.
that in the front porch there, it was open, and there's a screen door, and you could go directly into the porch from the front porch that you see here.
Yes, so you could enter directly from the front porch, and that was the primary entrance, as it is now.
Mhm.
Uh-huh, yeah. See the original roof line on the building, folks, and you see where the transecting gable was put on at a later point in time. That would be the east-west facing gable. And then, of course, the shed roof dormer, which is on the westerly most elevation of the original sloped roof as well. If you think about these photos we're taking right now and relate them to the historic picture that Christina has provided, I think you'll have a little bit better understanding of the transformations that have taken place on this house over time. Okay. I think we'll move on over and see April now. I wanted to do
Okay.
this, but I'm running out of time
Sure
so
thing.
quickly, and I don't want to turn her down.
Right.
Was there something on this end? Let's come on up here
Yeah,
with us, Christine.
Let's take a look.
Yeah, let's take a look on the north end of the building as we're walking out.
I know
We're I'm sorry, go ahead,
I
Christine.
know there's one window that was filled in.
Okay.
That would have gone to the other end of the porch.
Oh,
That
yes,
door is no longer in use.
of course.
And then you can see where a window was filled in right there at the end.
Yes. I think folks on this side, we're getting a little bit better sense of what the north elevation of this building, the stone building would have looked like. And Christine is pointing out the areas of infill and some other alterations that have taken place to the house. Yeah, a lot of neat things took place. Turned into a wonderful house. Christine, thank you ever so much.
Nice to see you.
Good seeing you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sure.
I've got some more info I'm going to share with you. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you,
Okay.
Christine.
Okay. 20 minutes. So
Bill?
I'm Pat. Yes.
Bill, I need to interrupt because we are a part of Bucknell University. As
Yes,
we
of course.
approach at April Fairweather's house, has
Yes.
April been vaccinated for COVID?
Yes. April has been vaccinated.
Are you certain?
Yes. I'm
Thank you.
positive.
Thank you. Okay, please continue.
Okay, so we're going to pass by for the moment two very historic houses in Bloomsburg because we have an invitation to see some interior construction. Let's just do the outside. There's April. Hi, we're not holding you up, are we? Okay. Mike's gonna do the tour. Okay, are we gonna go in the front? Let me just give a little bit of an introduction here right now. So we're at probably, come on down, April. Seriously, we're gonna get you in here anyway. Okay, meet my friend April Fairweather, who owns this wonderful house. This is a property that is typically regarded as being maybe the second or third oldest house in Lewisburg. April, I've been giving my students the gentle admonishment not to take dates with too much credence unless they have been verified. In the case of April's house, she happens to be the fourth owner since the latter part of the 18th century. And it is well documented. And when we go inside, you'll be seeing some of those written documents as well. Group, this is April Fairweather. She's lived here for a number of years. Historically known as the Robert Irwin House and built in 1789 or thereabouts, 91.
Now that you're mentioning that,
Yes.
since you were here the other day, I looked at
Over here.
one of those
Come over here. So you
ledgers.
talk to me on this side.
Oh,
Okay.
one of the ledgers.
Yeah,
And the date on there is 1787.
1787.
So unless the store was here first and the house was built later, I have no way of knowing that, but I think it's 1787. I think that's the correct date.
1787.
Yeah.
Okay. Folks, I'm going to let you draw some conclusions of your own, particularly when we go inside. Judging from the outside, and it's timely that we would talk about that, it would be very difficult to establish that date, simply because I'm going to give something away. This is a log house. It may have been sheathed over very early on with clavards or with planks, or maybe the logs were exposed. I'm not sure we're really certain on
They
that.
weren't exposed.
Those logs were probably never exposed. April is telling me.
This is a fancy house.
That's right. This
Not
was
a farmhouse.
a fancy house, right? This was a very, very high style log house. I think April claims that this might be the only 3-story log house in Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
That's what I was told by a historian, Charlie Snyder.
Okay, Charlie Snyder, one of the preeminent historians of the area, had informed April that the house was the only 3-story log house. It's very beautifully detailed inside, you'll see. However, on the outside, there is something that does sort of throw us off a little bit. And it's this very elaborate porch, which was constructed in 1907.
Right.
April says I'm right. There had been a store on this building through the ownership of Mr. Robert Irwin, which was relatively short, the latter part of the 18th century, and a few, or at least one, or maybe two of the subsequent owners operated store as well in this house. And then two subsequent owners operated store here. And then in 1907, The store was torn off the elevation, which is immediately to my right. That would be to my south. And this very delightful, if not overly fanciful porch was put on in that era. Here you see just the regular, the Tuscan style column, the balustrade, once again, not overly ornate, just very tasteful, very nicely done, and certainly in a period of over 100 years has worked very well. Once again, it's all about timing, folks. And Mike Molesevich is inside, and I think he's going to give us the tour.
One other thing.
Yes.
we didn't look at.
Oh, yes, right here.
That
Right.
was found on the property. I have no idea. My husband dug it up.
Yes, he did.
He hid it, and when they unearthed it, and then they somehow, a bunch of guys rolled it down the alley, and when we decided. But it's a cog that a mill.
It's a millstone.
Of some, but
Right.
I don't know where the mill was.
We would surely like to have thought it was from Ludwig Durr's mill,
Maybe it was.
just a few hundred yards to the south of where we're standing right now. Not totally unlike a millstone that would have been used in the operation of Ludwig Durr's mill in the 1780s. Yes, okay, let's go in. All right. Folks, this is just an incredibly wonderful opportunity. So gracious of April to have invited us in. She has shown me this house on some occasions previously, and there are some great features in here. You can get this.
Michael?
April's all talked out, Mike.
So here's the date.
Okay, so let's start with this. When we were talking about documentation, folks, hey Michael, how you doing? When we were speaking about documentation, I will. I'll do that. Yes, of course. Let's spin around before we do that, Brian. Another introduction, folks. Mike Molesevich.
Very good.
Yes, and he's going to give us some explanation on the house as well, what he knows about it, which is a lot. And Michael is an environmental engineer in the area and has his business on 4th Street in another wonderful historic building. And I think that he knows a lot about what's going on here. So we'll attempt to showcase some of these features. I just heard a ding. Were you okay? We didn't jump out, did we? Okay. Mike, when you're talking, you're going to have to be on my left, okay?
Okay.
So you can come around over here.
Talk now?
Let me just talk about the book, or I'll have April just describe the books. When we were talking about the documentation, and like I said, earlier I had given you a gentle admonition on not relying on dates, but in this specific instance, there are actually ledger books which have been retained from the early days of the store operation in this house. Unfortunately, in 2009, this house sustained significant damages in fire, and some of these ledger books have been affected by the fire. Some were actually destroyed, right, April?
Most of them were destroyed.
Most were destroyed. But I think Brian is getting a good shot right now. Was there anything in particular you wanted to show there, April? All right. We'll talk about the logs, Mike.
If you let April do as much as she wants to.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Maybe we'll have both. I just, for the purposes of what's going on here. Hold on. Are you hearing us?
And he said, Bill and I actually.
Hear
found this the
April,
other
but we
day.
hear you.
Received.
Do you hear
of
April?
Received of M. Robert Craig, $8, it being on account of the balance due to me from your humble servant. How about that?
Did you catch that, Heather?
Hi, your friend Andrew Knight.
Yes, I think folks can hear this.
So that
Okay.
was sort of interesting.
Fantastic.
This is 1793, it looks like to me.
So we're holding an actual receipt dated 1793.
Yes.
That's the kind of documentation, folks, you want to look at when you're trying to substantiate the names and the dates associated with these various historic buildings. because take my word for it, a lot of things have transpired over that period of time. Yeah. I think you're already looking at these logs and you want to hear about them. Do you want to talk about those a little bit, Michael? Yes. So the house was originally, I'll just throw in what I know and then you can expand on it if you would, Mike. So the house was originally constructed of these logs, which average about 15 inches square. They're oak, right, Michael?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Not really sure of the species.
I'm not sure, yeah.
We're not exactly sure of the species.
When they cut the holes for the windows after the storms were moved, that's documented as being, it took them a day and a half to cut the holes because it was solid oak. So that's all I know, unless these are something different, I don't know.
I'm just thinking of virgin timbers.
Yes.
When they were cut, chestnut.
Yes.
Very popular.
Absolutely.
Hemlocks, very, so anyway.
Yes, yes.
I'm not sure.
They were virgin timbers. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for pointing that out. When I was visiting with April the other day, we made a curious observation that this house is well over nearly 250 years old. These are virgin logs that you're looking at. And I would guess, you probably know better than I, Michael, these trees were probably about 200 years old at least when they were cut.
Or older.
Or older.
And very tall.
And very tall. So these members are conservatively 400 to 500 years old. And they were built to last, as we said. And the house was chinked originally with just a variety of materials. April and I had discussed that. Just about anything, twigs, hair, possibly mud, manure, a substance that was commonly referred to as daub and wattle between the logs. This, of course, has been replaced after the fire. Michael, what do we think about the adze marks or the broad axe marks on here? Typically, we would have seen like a little shard of wood sticking out, wouldn't we?
Actually, April taught me this, that your first thought was that it was done purposely, perhaps to have plaster on it. So it's not just rough cut and cut. This was a formal home. And so before the fire, there was plaster over that. Mm-hmm. And we believe that those marks were created for more surface area,
right,
the plaster to adhere. But the other unique thing that we need to mention is not only is this a log home on a stone foundation, mm-hmm. It's a 3-story log home, which is very rare.
That's right.
Very rare.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think that fact that Michael and April have illuminated about the device that was employed to, I'm going to call it hook the plaster in a later point in time when plaster and lath was used. The spacing was achieved such that the plaster, the soft plaster, could hook between the lath strips. In this specific instance where plaster was applied to these logs, there needed to be a similar texture to which the plaster would adhere. Hence, there were little swirls of this wooden material that were actually exposed to hook the plaster fast. Does that sound right?
Sure.
I think so. Let's look up here, folks.
I do. But...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can you see that? Yeah. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's a hex sign, and April and Michael have told me that an historian has deemed that was put there originally. That was Mr. Charlie Snyder. He was the preeminent historian in this area, and he indicated that the hex sign would have been incised in the beam at that point in time. I don't know a lot about timber framing, but I'm going to call that the summer, that particular beam. And I believe that the other members that are running at the perpendicular, those would be the joists themselves. So this big beam would be attached into another similar end beam, and that would be the girt. This is the summer beam. And you can see that the joists themselves have a blind mortise. Actually the joists have a tenon, which is blind. It is carved onto the end and then inserted into a slot in the summer beam, which would be called the mortise. And then there was a hole drilled in there, and you can see a peg, which is called a trennel or a trunnel, was driven through. And that almost cemented this building in place nearly 250 years ago. And those things that you're looking at are pretty much original. Yes. Take a look at the delicious stairway. There's everything in this house, folks. I had told you on the outside, or I had mentioned to some.
Brobst there giving the tour. That's
I had
Mike
meant.
That's me.
I had mentioned to someone on the George Knox house on St. George Street that the massive end chimney probably carried as many as 4 or 5 fireplaces. In this specific instance, Brian, if you just want to turn around and look into the parlor and then into the dining room, the chimney, the end chimney on this house carries 5 fireplaces. There are 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second floor, and a 3rd fireplace on the 3rd floor of this house. All Siamese flues into one chimney. It's a very, very nice device, believe me. Floors, a good bit of original flooring in here, even after the fire, correct? After the devastating fire to which I referred a moment ago in 2009, April did employ a local fellow, Mr. George Morton, from the Selinsgrove area, and a very fine artisan. And he was able to replicate nearly everything. And I think as we go through, April and or Michael can point out even the moldings, where they're original and where they have been replicated very, very faithfully, correct? And likewise the floorboards. I'm sorry, April, on the floor. Where were you telling me it was placed in?
All right, this piece was a
Yes. Okay.
This is original, and all that is original over there. But the fire burned, I think as we talked, it burned down here and ruined these floors and then went up instead of continuing this one.
And Brian, just come over and stand on the outside of this stair and have a shot up. This is an open stair that goes all the way through. Just a beautifully defined stairway. As Michael pointed out earlier, this was truly a high style home, a very gracious stairway with a very comfortable, a very pleasant rise and a very nice accommodating width on the treads of the boards as well. Brian is just kind of circulating among the 2 front rooms of the house. It was built sort of, like I said, roughly in that early federal style, asymmetric, with the doorway and the stairway being off to one side and the main rooms off to the other side of the door. This would be the dining room, of course, and then let's proceed into the kitchen. Okay.
You'll just stay right there a minute and have Brian take a shot up here as soon as I get the light. You can see how high this house is.
Yeah. I don't think you heard April. She is, as she said, she's really high right now. High in the house, that is. I'm high on the house. This is a log house, folks, not to be misconstrued or confused with a log cabin. Very, very high style, timber framed, constructed with logs, sheathed on the outside with clapboards, probably from the very beginning.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I'm wondering if the logs might have been exposed and the clapboard came later.
That this is very, very possible. Yeah, I think it was popular, Michael, that clapboards were put on log buildings relatively early on. Whether it happened or not originally, that would be very difficult for me to say.
I don't know, did you see this?
I did not.
When I was doing some work on the fireplace, I found that. That's an original nail.
Wow, is that great or what? Original handmade nail. And in case I hadn't told you folks, when we were talking about early industry in Lewisburg, I had mentioned foundries, and I had mentioned farm implement manufacturers located down in this neighborhood. And there were also nail works in Lewisburg. So very likely a fastener of this nature would have been manufactured right here in the area. Thanks, Mike. That's great. Yeah. So you got an idea of the stairway, how beautifully formed, how nicely proportioned it is. It's as if it would have come from a house in the Harrisburg or even the Philadelphia area. Obviously, a man of great taste when he built this house. Let's see, so much in this hallway, but we can't wait to get into the kitchen. Heather, we're running out of time, are we not?
I see that. Yes,
Oh,
it is
okay.
2 o'clock
Do you-
right now.
Do you want to, and do you want to tell folks that we can hang in for another couple minutes and then we'll wind it up from that, or what's the desire of our group, Heather? Thanks, Mike.
I feel like Bill just did that, but folks, this is all a bit of a surprise to me, actually. Bill hadn't filled me in totally on what we were going to be doing today. So if you would like to hang
Hang in a little bit.
a little bit, we're getting a couple people saying, please keep going.
They're saying, please keep
We are
going.
I'm not
recording.
leaving.
Yeah, we are recording, and I will share with you the extra footage if you do have to leave at 3 o'clock. We totally understand. So,
Okay, all right.
Oh,
So,
awesome fireplace.
okay, so we're getting some consensus here. We want to have a little bit more touring. This is all, of course, being recorded for those that can't hang in. But anyway, go ahead with the fireplace. This is the portion of the house, Michael, that it was originally constructed of stone.
Yes, this was all rebuilt or restored after the fire. This is still original. This is all original. And actually, this is where this was the source of the unfortunate 2009 fire.
Yes.
This was the culprit. And it's only speculation on the purpose of this little arched device or structure. My theory is an early oven of some type.
That probably went on through the oven being constructed on the backside.
No, actually, it's stone on the backside.
Okay.
My theory would be this would have come out this way.
Okay,
Hence, the oven would have been in part of the fire here.
I understand.
Because it went out the other way, it'd be cold.
But of course, okay. So yes, that's entirely plausible. The oven would have actually projected beyond into the hearth area of the fireplace.
And then perhaps fire and embers could have been under or closer to the
Right, and the
extension.
And the loading area, the doorway would have been out here, absolutely. And I wonder, do we think that the crane might be original to the house?
As far as we know, it is.
Wow. The cooking crane, Michael is speculating that the cooking crane is original to the house. Wow. Mhm. Incredible, beautiful feature. Look at the thickness of these stone walls. The kitchen area of this house was always originally stone. Now, running out of time, I have to think of these things. There are 3 documented houses, we think, in the borough of Lewisburg that served as stops along the Underground Railroad. And this was one of them. And there is a good bit of written documentation to that effect. And I'm going to step into the corner of the room where beneath which these folks know there was a trap door, and into which there was an iron ring recessed that would have permitted the easy removal. And beneath that is an area into which I have been in a previous time, small area that would have been suitable for the accommodation of some slaves as they were being harbored in this house. Correct, April? And these things I'm telling you are written down. We did talk about, if you folks who are interested in the activities of the Underground Railroad, there's at least one place that is thoroughly documented. Hopefully we'll be hitting that closer to the end of the tour, not today. That would be the Bliss House on University Avenue, and also the Nesbitt House, which had most recently been the Copper Beach Manor, just sort of adjacent to this building on Market Street. And that has been documented as a stop on the Underground Railroad as well. And I have seen that particular area of that house that was used as such. What else should we cover down here?
You want to do the basement quick?
Let's do the basement. You folks, you know how much I like belfries and basements. So in this specific instance, we're going to the basement.
Where all the action is.
Michael's going to point out he and I share a fondness for basements, and we'll be able to see more of the timber framing construction down here. Okay,
Let's
yes.
look at this timber.
Oh,
Because what amazes me about this one is the length.
yes,
Of this timber spanning the entire width of the basement.
yes, yes. This main timber spans the entire width of this house, as Michael has pointed out. And that was, we assume that it was hewn from one log, of course. This vertical member, I think when I had been down here the last time, April and I had discussed this, and I said, this may have been replaced over time simply because the vertical members oftentimes tend to rot away.
Right, right.
Correct.
Obviously, years ago, this was not a concrete floor. It was
That is correct.
partially, it was dug out and then extended further. Since we're at this timber, I want to point out this mark.
Oh, yes, of course.
So I will read high water mark at
6:30 a.m.
6:30 a.m. March 19, 1936.
Wow.
So this is the second highest flood recorded that we know of in Lewisburg, with the other being
72.
1972, which reached the baseboard.
Baseboards. Right.
So 36 flood, 72 was upstairs a little
Great.
bit.
Did we get that all in, Heather? I think that's very important. And that's a beautifully embossed strip of metal that somebody took some time to emboss a strip of metal to indicate the flood elevation in 1936. At that time, as Michael said, that was the flood of record. 1972 was several feet above that to the tops of what would be the baseboards in the main rooms of the first floor. Great stuff. Oops, I'm sorry, go ahead. You go.
When you talked about the fireplace.
Yes, sir.
Here's the base of the fireplace, and my theory is this was either a clean out or most likely someone had a wood stove in here.
Or furnaces, subsequent
And
furnaces.
there was some fireproof material that
Yes.
was right above it. And so with the evolution of heating with wood and then heating with coal.
Right.
And there was a coal bin over here
Okay, coal bin was in this area.
before the gas boiler now. And there was most likely a coal furnace of some type.
Yes.
Or coal stove.
Absolutely. Yes. As recently as my last visit, when April and I were looking at the two thimble crocks that go into the chimney, obviously when the house was built, those foundations supported all of those fireplaces above. And in that era, there would have been no reason to have heat in this area. So at a later point in time, there was an area of those fireplaces which was actually captured to create the flues that accommodated one or two furnaces. There's another one over there, correct, Michael? Yes. So those would represent the bases of the two first floor fireplaces. And then of course, the second floor fireplaces are immediately above them. And the third floor fireplace would be centered on the chimney.
And
Okay.
if you're wondering what the yellow foam-like material in the opening there in the flue is, we made an effort to make this more comfortable.
Yes,
And part of making an old house comfortable is sealing air leakage.
correct.
And so we had spray foam around the perimeter and other areas where air would leak to make it more comfortable, to reduce draft.
Absolutely.
And the best place to reduce draft would be,
Through the chimneys. But of course,
which were made for draft.
absolutely, they were intended to be draft. Just have a look at these other beams, these transverse beams above the main girder here. They were not quite as finely hewn. They were definitely not sawn on any sort of a mill. They were hewn roughly with a broad axe. So you just get a sense of what the actual trees look like in this specific instance. While we're down here, Michael, let's just spin around here for a second. We get out your, do you have your flashlight there? Or your phone rather? I talked about the room, the underground railroad. So that would have been the little, Michael is putting the light to the area of the stone wall immediately beneath the trapdoor, correct, April?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, roughly. It would have been accessible through that trapdoor.
It dropped into this section over here.
Yes.
And that was walled off, so there was no access except through that trapdoor.
That's right. That was the only access. That room was totally segregated, totally sealed off. The other thing I wanted to point out, Michael, while you were in the front, and April and I had talked about this when I visited the other day, the entryway that goes, it's now underneath the front porch. There's a possibility that the buildings on this side of Water Street, I'm referring to the west side, that there may have been fill that had taken place over time, that these buildings on this western side may have had a greater exposure to daylight, giving them access to the river area. Although in this specific instance, the house across the street, at least one half of the house across the street was built contemporaneous to this house in the 1790s. So there were storeroom and commercial activities taking place over there. There was definitely a more formalized entry basement way that went out underneath what is the front porch right now. The basement may not, what I'm saying is the basement may not have been quite as subterranean as it is right now. A little bit of fill.
I have
Yes.
something I want to say to your group.
Yes.
I found in those ledgers, I found some newspaper articles, and there was one this morning that I want to share. There was a farmer who told us all what to do if our cows are bloating.
Okay.
And so if anyone out there is having trouble with their cows bloating up on them,
Okay.
this tells you what to do.
It does. Do you have that in your collection?
Well,
Okay.
it fell out of the ledger as I was trying.
It was. Oh my God. There was all kinds of useful information that was promulgated in that era in these stores. Well, there were numerous activities that took place in these buildings.
I want to give just a tribute to Jack Fairweather, who was April's late husband and a noted physician and a World War II veteran, landed on the beaches of Normandy with the Canadian division. And if it wasn't for Jack, we wouldn't be standing here because he was the one who purchased this home in 1967.
67. Right.
Thanks, Jack.
Yes. Jack Fairweather's home purchased in 1967. Was Jack native to the? No, was he Canadian? Jack was Canadian.
And the fifth owner or fourth owner?
Fourth owner.
Yeah.
April's the fourth owner. Okay. We're about 10 minutes over time. We've got a lot of good stuff. Why don't we take a quick breeze through upstairs? Do you want to, can we take in, let's feel the stairway, see how that feels to our Zoom customers. And then we'll look at the two rooms on the second floor. Oh, I know, the timber framing where the diagonal post is on the back porch. Okay, let's have a look at that. Okay.
Mike, are you going up?
Why don't you explain that? Or if you want me to, I can go up. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Just the exposed logs in that little computer room.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, but-
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you come back sometime when you want to get started?
Okay, we'll do. Thank you very much.
You want to take a quick shot of this because this is shows.
Yes. One through Brian. This is the extension of the log construction coming on to second floor, and it continues right on into the third, as we had pointed out before. Yes. 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 Okay. Yes, there are a couple of things I wanted to point out here. The dimensions of the logs are not quite the same. They do preserve a little bit more of the patina than you saw downstairs. Likewise, the chinking has a bit more patina than the newer finished patina chinking downstairs. But the important thing is this diagonal brace. This is called the knee brace. And you know, folks, when we were in the church last week, the name of this little joint right here just totally escaped me. And of course, it drove me crazy till I started going back on timber framing. And this is the toe joint at which this diagonal knee brace is inserted between these horizontal members. So I just thought it was neat. When we do go to the Dale Engel Walker house, we'll be seeing totally exposed timber framing construction. This is the best example I can think of in the borough currently. There are about 6 log houses that we know of currently in Lewisburg, but they have all been sufficiently covered up. And this is the one that I think showcases best. For those of you who have the opportunity to go to Packwood House Museum, there is one room in the Packwood in which the original stone logs are exposed as well, but they are very, very deteriorated. I have attempted to determine what the style of joinery of the corners of this building are. Do you know that, Michael? Did I ask you that question before? You do.
If you did, I do not know the answer.
Okay, all right. It's not all that important, folks. It's just another rather obscure bit of architectural trivia. There are numerous types of joinery that were used in these log houses, some more fanciful, more elaborate than others. I will be showing you one on the Kent's cabin out at the Dale Engel Walker house in a highly deteriorated version. I think that this particular building utilized one of the more sophisticated, but I do not know that for sure. But we're going to leave it with that, I believe. Heather, is that about enough? I'm 15 minutes over time. Are we good to go?
Beautiful. It's a beautiful home. Please extend my
beautiful?
gratitude to these owners.
It's a beautiful home.
Beautiful.
Before, as we're going down, can we just look in those other 2 rooms? I'll show those fireplaces. Yeah. Okay. Yes. We were talking, I forget, did Rebecca had asked me, I think, about the fireplaces and the fact that they may have been a luxury feature in that era, even though this was, as Michael and I have said, this was a high style house in the era. These fireplaces were very, very much required for the heating of this house. They were the singular source of heat, hence all 5 of them on the north end of the house and the one in the kitchen, all original to the building, and one more in the front bedroom. The fireplace that we just passed has no surround, no breastwork. I think that your contractor had decided to take that off at the time of the fire. Originally, of course, that would have had a similarly formal mantle. And there are a lot of things to talk about on these mantelpieces, but we'll have to save that for another day.
And with a view of the river.
Let's end with a view of the river. Yes, a spectacular view of the river. Michael, thank you very much. We're going to, did April leave?
Bill, I have a quick
okay.
question since we're
see her
looking
on her
out the window.
Okay, yes,
We're looking out the window. This home was built in, they've been now are
yes.
guessing
Mhm.
And now for
Hold on a second. She's
17,
talking to me.
let me see here.
Yes, that's okay. Hold on.
I had my notes here. 1787 is the possible date of this house.
Yes, correct.
The Christine's house there on the corner didn't come along for almost 100 years later.
Correct.
Almost 100 years.
That
And the
is
storeroom.
correct. Yes.
What is
And we'll
the
just-
other?
Right. We'll take a look before we leave today, so long as we're on second floor. The building immediately to the south, I'm referring to sort of a 4-square house, no particular style with a hip roof, built in the first decade or so of the 20th century. And then the stone wall is reputedly the oldest standing stone house in the borough of Lewisburg. And the date attributed to that house would be 1786. And
So
that was the
view
William
to the
Williams house.
river
Right, would have been
originally from this
unobstructed.
floor was beautiful.
Was primarily unobstructed. That is correct.
That's lovely.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, Brian's following. We're going to say goodbye to April and Jack on our way out the door. I think our folks are ready to wind it up for one day. We've got a lot more stuff in old Lewisburg, but we shall come back on another occasion and pick up on that. When we finish up, April's still here. I wanted to say goodbye. Okay, we'll go outside and we'll say goodbye to April and then, okay. Okay, yes, let's come through. These folks won't let it.
The stone wall, the original stone wall is not affected by fire.
Okay. Not affected by fire. Oh, yes. Oh, let me
Oh, look
step
at
over
that.
here. Yeah, you can talk.
That
So
is
April has just
beautiful.
pointed out to me that this is the original stone wall of the kitchen. This is very important, and thank you for bringing it out. I keep saying every one of these features makes a nice conclusion to our tour, but I could go on saying that till tomorrow at this time. This is unlike the dressed limestone, quarried limestone that we observed in the basement of Christine Sperling's house across the street nearly 100 years later. These are on-course. We'll call these rubble stones. They're a little bit more than just plain rubble. These would be field stones. These are a variety of types of stones, primarily sandstone from this area, but these are stones that simply would have been picked from the fields and the woods. These stones were not quarried. I was going to point that out on the house to our south, the William Williams house, but here we see the perfect close-up example of it. And lovely gardens, turn around, let's do that. So you and Jack were responsible for some of that originally, this development of this garden, is that correct?
He was the gardener.
Jack was the, Jack
And now Mike is.
and Mike.
Oh, you are April.
Okay, well, I know it seems like whenever I come by that April is out here gardening as well. Yes, absolutely. Well, folks, let's wind it up for one day. Let's give a big thanks to April and Michael for the
Yes, you
delightful
guys
tour
have
of
to
this house.
Please extend our thanks from the whole class. I know they don't have earphones to hear this, so.
April or Heather tells me that you're getting resounding applause from all 21 of our people. Michael says keep the applause down. Okay. So anyway, thanks again for bearing with me. I know I'm long-winded, folks, but you can see I have a heck of a lot to talk about here. And I've got such gracious hosts and hostesses who are willing to show these properties, and we just simply don't want to turn this down. I want you to all come out exploring Lewisburg on your own. Till next time, same place, and hopefully we'll have something equally delightful. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right. And with
Can't wait
that,
till next
everyone
week.
good.
Can't wait till next.
Can't wait till next week.
Yeah, we are. That was fantastic. You said Ryan did a good job.